Hello folks, and welcome to Jack Reviews Musicals. If this is your first time seeing my face here on the internet, my name is Jack, and I am a musical theater superfan based in St. Louis, Missouri, and you have stumbled upon my YouTube channel, where I share my thoughts on all of the musical productions I go out to see in the St. Louis area. This right here is my first review of 2025, so welcome aboard. I'm sharing my thoughts on New Line Theater's production of The Rocky Horror Show, which is currently playing right now at the Marcel Theater until March 22nd of 2025. The Rocky Horror Show is production number 2 of 3 of New Line Theater's season of revival, where they produce shows that they have already done in the past. This is their second ever production of the Rocky Horror Show after last performing it in 2002, and this mounting is quite auspicious because 1, it features an original cast member of that production returning for this one, and also because Rocky Horror has become extremely important within the last decade, coincidentally the last time that a professional theater company in St. Louis has done Rocky Horror. Now, if you've been living under a rock and you have no idea what this show is, Rocky Horror is this generation-defining, culture-defining musical in that it is extremely 70s and queer. The Rocky Horror Show is a British export birthed from the experimental theater movement in London in the late 60s to early 70s. It originally premiered in 1973 in the Royal Court Theatre's Black Box space. Now, this was a fully immersive production, breaking the fourth wall, using sets and costumes that were basically scavenged and thrifted from every which way, and an over-the-top acting style that made the whole presentation feel a bit haphazard. And back then, it was really revolutionary, really ahead of its time, mainly because the subject matter was very unapologetically, aggressively queer. It basically had the vibe of this sci-fi horror-themed drag show in a seedy dive bar. None of that high-effort stuff that you get from some of these modern-day touring productions or concerts, remakes, reboots, what have you. Those productions were banking on the success of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the 1975 film adaptation that starred Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon. The film was directed by Jim Sharman, who directed the original stage production. And it also starred original cast members of the show: Tim Curry, Patricia Quinn, Little Nell Campbell, Meatloaf, and the show's creator, the brilliant, twisted mind, Richard O'Brien. Now, when the movie first came out, it was met with a lot of backlash, but has since then achieved cult classic status that pushed it into the mainstream. And because of the drag show vibes of it all, there are theaters that do shadow casts of the film. Actors miming the movie in front of the screen and even codifying different forms of audience participation, shouting back at the screen on cue, throwing different props at the screen during certain scenes. Now, I do want to reiterate here before I go any further that New Line Theater is not doing a shadow cast of the movie, nor did they do anything in this production to try and recreate the movie. They just presented the stage show as it was originally intended, with no funny business. Because the thing about the original London production was that it was essentially made by nobody, just complete amateurs. And that's what New Line Theater was aiming for with this production, to kind of return Rocky Horror to that sort of raw, essential form of how it was made. Now, Richard O'Brien created the Rocky Horror Show as a way to kind of send up sci-fi and horror B-movies from the mid-20th century. The kind of movies that he would just go to the theater and just jeer at Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. The kinds of movies that contained barely sublimated sexual themes during this very conservative, very repressed mindset in America at the time. The show opens with an usherette for an old school movie theater singing the classic song Science Fiction Double Feature that pays homage to all of those cult classic B movies, featuring this very lyrical, mashup, fan fiction-esque narrative that, believe it or not, actually provides foreshadowing for the events to come in the show. We even have a narrator who is literally straight out of a William Castle movie or Rod Serling in The Twilight Zone. Our central characters are Brad Majors and Janet Weiss, two straight-laced, conservative, sexually repressed kids straight out of college, and they decide to get married. The first thing they decide to do is meet up with Dr. Everett Scott, the high school science teacher whose class they first met and started dating. On the way there, a thunderstorm breaks out, Brad and Janet have car trouble, and they are forced to seek refuge inside of a nearby castle in the middle of any town, USA. They're invited inside, and Brad and Janet discover that the castle is filled with alien transvestites from the planet Transsexual in the Transylvanian galaxy. I am not making this up. The first person they meet is Riff Raff, this creepy, unblinking, stiff as a board butler who tells Brad and Janet that their master is having one of his affairs. We also meet Magenta, a stereotypical sexy French maid who isn't actually French but pretends that she is. We find out that Magenta is Riff Raff's sister, and the two of them are in an incestuous relationship. And then there's Columbia, a fellow human who alongside her boyfriend Eddie became groupies of the castle's owner. When we first see Columbia, Eddie is not by her side, and every time she mentions his name, everybody else shushes her. In fact, Riff Raff and Magenta decide to distract everybody from Eddie by introducing Brad and Janet to one of the Transylvanian native dances. The time warp. A jump to the left, step to the right, the pelvic thrust, all that good stuff. It's a classic dance song, you should know it by now. And it's then that we meet the castle's master, the drag queen, rock star, mad scientist, Dr. Frank N. Furter. He introduces himself with another banger, Sweet Transvestite, where he invites Brad and Janet to stay the night from the storm. In fact, he actually strips Brad and Janet of their wet things down to their underwear, and he unveils to them exactly what he was doing on Earth, creating life. Frank has built a creature, a tall, tan, blonde, handsome, muscular Adonis named Rocky, who was specifically built to fulfill all of Frank's sexual fantasies. And as soon as Frank unveils his finished creature, Brad and Janet discover that Eddie was actually sliced, diced, and killed for parts in order to create Rocky. And it's from here Brad and Janet get completely swept into the Transylvanians' world of debauchery and depravity, to the point that they completely give themselves over to their innermost desires and carnal pleasures. Of course, to dire consequences. It's a surprisingly complicated story, even though the proceedings are campy to the point of being absurd. But for some reason, it feels very welcoming, almost. Because, for one thing, the characters are just so well written. All of the characters have distinct personalities, and they are so much fun to watch bounce off of each other. Every single song in this show is a certified bop. There is not one song that I don't remember from this. Science Fiction Double Feature, The Time Warp, Sweet Transvestite, Damn It Janet, Hot Patootie, Eddie's Teddy, The Floor Show that serves as the 11 o'clock number. And what makes the story especially relevant these days is that it is this unabashedly, maliciously manic celebration of queerness and all of the warts that comes with being a queer person. The climax of The Floor Show, Wild and Untamed Thing, has the characters bounding across the stage with gleeful abandon, singing about the freedom that comes from living their life unapologetically, if you'll pardon me for being coarse, dick forward. Then we get the finale of the show, Superheroes. And that song, that is such a total gut punch. It's about the simultaneous emptiness and sort of ravenous desire that comes from living as a queer person in a world that is so repressive and misapproving. Act 1 was written with such fun and fancy and campiness that by the time the last half of Act 2 comes around, it has such poetry to it and such nuance and such grace. You really feel for the characters, and you feel pretty angry at the world that they're living in and the fact that it's our world. And that's just from the material as it was written. It would be so easy for a production of the Rocky Horror Show to just crash and burn because of its inability to reconcile the campiness of the premise with the seriousness of its themes. But I think New Line Theaters succeeds in striking that balance, mainly because they do things in their production that are incredibly unique, totally different from the movie and any other production that tries to bank on its popularity but fall flat. It was obvious from the beginning, co-directors Scott Miller and Chris Moore, they did not want to do a carbon copy of the movie. All they wanted to do was take what was there in the material, figure in what they did in the original London production, and just do their own spin on it. For one thing, they used the entirety of the Marcel Theater black box space as their playing area, not just the set, which was designed by Rob Lippert. The set places the audience on 3 sides of a runway that's lit with incandescent bulbs across it. There's a small platform in the back, and it's set in front of a scaffold that is just covered in webs and chains and gears. Very evocative of a parody Frankenstein castle. The action of the show takes place on and around the set, as well as into the aisles of the audience. Riff Raff's solo in Over the Frankenstein Place is done from the audience, and for the moment when Brad and Janet enter the castle, Riff Raff beckons them through the door that the audience uses to enter the space. The runway is also flanked by mic stands, and the actors sing into handheld microphones during the songs. Actors hand mics off to each other to share in the moment. There are times where characters snatch microphones back and forth to vie for control of the scene, like in Brad's interaction with Frank during Sweet Transvestite. Once again, they make the show feel like an immersive rock concert, and it makes the vocals feel a bit more punchy than if they were to just use lavalier mics, which was a brilliant move on the part of sound designer Ryan Day. The actors, when they were on the handheld mics, were easily heard over the New Line band, who were, as always, rockin' the joint. They were in top shape, delivering these classic songs with toe-tapping, head-bopping, invigorating energy. The band was led with utter confidence by musical director Randon Lane on piano, as well as Jason Eshoffen on the synth, Adam Rugo on guitar, John Gerdes on bass, Clancy Newell on the drums, and Brandon Thompson on the saxophone. Now, New Line's production uses the small ensemble cast that is specified in the script instead of the film's expanded cast, and all of the actors were simply terrific. Vocally, they sounded great, they do justice to these great songs, but at the same time, they craft their own unique interpretations of these characters who are already unforgettable and found new layers to them that make us love them even more. First on the board are our Brad and Janet, who are played by Rafael da Costa and Brittany Cole, respectively. These two were wonderful. They gave earnest portrayals that make perfectly clear Brad and Janet's very interesting layered character arcs. Like, instead of going for this stereotypical nerd portrayal that a lot of actors do for Brad, Rafael DaCosta goes for a more leading man performance of a debonair gentleman who's a little awkward. The kind of performance that you would get from the likes of Gregory Peck or a Cary Grant. DaCosta exuded an over-the-top jauntiness. Like, there's this running gag throughout the show where at the slightest hint of rudeness, he takes off his glasses in a humph. Like, oh, that was great. And Brad's big solo, Once in a While, is this huge show of sadness for lost love that is hilarious in how presentational and exaggerated it is, but also kind of sad, because Rafael DaCosta's vocals are so honest in its sadness that you really feel how profound Brad's loss is. Brittany Cole as Janet as well is very evocative of actresses like Sandra Dee or early Patty Duke, the girl next door who is more independent than she lets on. Now, Cole's performance is a bit closer to how Susan Sarandon played her in the movie, but it works really well here. The way that Cole portrays Janet's initial resistance and disgust towards the castle makes her sexual awakening in Act 2 very dramatically potent, with the solo Touch Me being truly captivating to watch. Sultry body language and vocals that were very well delivered. DaCosta and Cole even have realistic chemistry for a couple to get caught in this situation. The best example demonstrating that is the time warp. In this production, Brad actually joins the aliens and the narrator in on the dance, which one gives more credence to Brad's line, "Say, do any of you guys know how to Madison?" But it also gives Janet's exasperation towards the castle a lot more dramatic weight. Very smart directing on the part of Scott Miller and Chris Moore. But now let's talk about the big one. The most coveted role in the Rocky Horror Show, Dr. Frank N. Furter, the breakout role of Tim Curry. His Frank is an absolute icon. He's played at New Line Theater by New Line veteran Todd Schaefer, who, surprise, surprise, is the OG cast member that I teased about at the very beginning of the review. In New Line's first production of Rocky Horror in 2002, Mr. Schaefer played Brad, and now he has come back to play Frank 23 years later. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I've been looking at other actors who have played Frank in the past, and this role is ideal for men who are kind of getting up there in years. And it's mainly because of the role's vocal demands, where you really have to hit those deep, sultry notes and quivering vibratos that, for men, get better with age. I also think that Frank being an older man makes a lot of sense dramatically. I have a theory that Frank wanted to make Rocky as the human representation of everything that Frank isn't. Like, everything Frank wishes that he could be, he put into Rocky. That right there is an excellent example of truly insightful, really smart casting choices on the part of New Line Theater. And Todd Schaefer is an actor who clearly has a reverence and respect for Rocky Horror, to the point that he actually made no effort whatsoever to do a Tim Curry impression. His Frank was entirely his own, making him more of this screaming queen diva than Tim Curry's more regal, refined approach. Throughout the show, Todd Schaefer just exuded this effortlessly funny petulance from Frank. My favorite example of it being in Eddie's Teddy, to show how salty that both Frank and Janet are towards each other for having sex with the other's partner. They engage in a riff-off to try and outdo each other's ending of the song, made even more hilarious by Dr. Scott being right in the middle of them, just having absolutely none of it. And so his lack of shame and, forgive the pun, frankness make a lot of sense. I mean, during I'm Going Home, Frank's big torch song, Frank actually takes his wig off to reveal Todd Schaefer's actual hair. It was a very simple action, but it really showed just how vulnerable and feeble Frank really is under all of that, peacocking and posturing. Again, a very layered performance. Now we have B. Meesey as Riffraff, who was great whenever they had to essentially be a diminutive version of Lurch from the Addams Family. Very stoic, but also at the same time kind of free whenever they are not around Frank. However, I do think their performance might have been better if they committed a little bit more to Riffraff's heel turn as the antagonist. At the performance that I saw, they were a bit restrained. I would have liked a bit more of an arc there, with Riffraff being consistently frustrated to the point of just exploding and just going full stupid on them. But again, that's just more of a personal preference. And I can kind of say the same thing for Katie Orr as Magenta, which is a role that is woefully underwritten, so I can't really fault her for that. Not to say that she does a bad job, but where she really eats is Trixie the Usherette, who sings science fiction double feature. She really gave it her all. She had this soulful vocal that was full of high notes and enthusiastic growls. And I kind of have similar feedback for Christopher Strahan, who plays Eddie and Dr. Scott. I felt he didn't really attack Eddie as much as I wanted him to in Hot Patootie. He didn't really go full meatloaf on us. But again, Strahan ate as Dr. Scott, channeling Vincent Price and Ray Milland with his deadpan voice, and a no-nonsense attitude that made the ridiculousness around him even more hilarious, especially with his vocals in Eddie's Teddy. Zachary Thompson as Rocky was a revelation. In the movie, they made the decision of making Rocky mute for most of it, which is honestly a shame. Rocky is kind of the precursor to what we would call a modern-day himbo. And in that regard, Thompson infuses Rocky with this doe-eyed innocence. And, combined with his, statuesque handsomeness, like he's built essentially like a classical Greek statue. It really does make it outrageous considering that he parades around in absolutely nothing but a gold lame thong and gladiator sandals. And the confidence that Thompson exudes whenever he is posing as Rocky, being treated as this sex symbol where if you got it, flaunt it. It's actually kind of endearing in a way. Tori Shea Cole is a terrific find as Columbia, the groupie. Her interpretation is actually very reminiscent of one of the leads in the Russ Meyer film Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, playing up this stereotypical stoner hippie type. Her dance break in the time warp was energized like crazy, and her arc of becoming increasingly frustrated with the aliens was compelling to watch on its own. And finally, we have Chelsea Johnston as the narrator, who was also great. I love how they went for a classical librarian criminologist approach, where they had the narrator be an actor instead of a comedian like some other productions do. Like Christopher Strahan as Dr. Scott, Chelsea Johnston uses a deadpan delivery that makes all of the shenanigans happening around her all the more funny. Particularly when she starts grooving and dancing and joining in on the time warp and Eddie's Teddy and also Rocky's intro song, The Sword of Damocles. Johnston also served as the production's choreographer, creating dance moves that were relatively simple, but they were just downright sexy, menacingly campy fun. One touch that I particularly loved was everybody dancing in Hot Patootie except for Frank, to show how unhappy he is with Eddie coming back in a show of defiance. Directors Scott Miller and Chris Moore crafted quite a few standout moments that emphasized how Rocky Horror is supposed to be this inherently theatrical experience. The Usherette, for example, throws candy into the audience during science fiction double feature, and when Brad and Janet first get into their car, they're actually miming all of the motions of getting into their car as the narrator exposits to the audience. To the point that when it starts to rain, Brad and Janet actually use their arms to mime the windshield wipers going up and down. And in Act 2, when the characters are looking through the security cameras in the castle to spy on each other, they go up into the band space, they turn around, one of the music stands, they're like, whoa! Stuff like that is great, and it really does immerse you in this weird as hell cartoon world. The sensual moments were staged by intimacy choreographer Jocelyn Padilla, and they were downright expert. The sex really felt seamless with the rest of the staging. The costumes and prompts by Aaron Goodenough were quite excellent, actually. Brad and Janet, of course, they have looks paying homage to the movie. Rocky is in this golden Grecian god look that was fabulous. And of course, the narrator's crisp brown librarian uniform. But there's also some really great original designs, like Frank's drag makeup is unique. Columbia is dressed more like a cast member of Hair, and the costumes that are worn in the floor show are actually tributes to classic 70s girl pop groups, with Frank dressed as Marilyn Monroe. And there is a really funny touch in the floor show where Brad, even though he is dressed in a wig and a dress, they kept him in his own shoes and tube socks to show that at this point he is really out of his element from everybody else. The lyrics of his section in the floor show will paint that picture crystal clear. But what really set the atmosphere outside of Rob Lippert's set was the lighting design by Jack Kalin. I really loved how they used stage haze in science fiction double feature. I loved the coldness of the lighting in Once in a While and the absolute bright pops of red and pink for Touch Me. And the climax with the floor show and superheroes, they were so brilliant in their use of bright colors and pin spots and shadow contrast. It really goes to show you, New Line Theater went the extra mile to make the Rocky Horror Show feel like a vital piece of theater. Acting that, even though it's campy, feels really true to the craziness of the world that we are living in right now. Incredibly catchy songs that have rockin' tunes to them, and so many iconic moments whose mark on the media landscape is indelible. The Rocky Horror Show is a remarkable musical that speaks so immediately to the queer experience, and New Line's production reminds us not just how fun this show is, just good old-fashioned fun, but it's also so well written. Scott Miller actually wrote in the program notes for this production that we are right now seeing the American government continuously threatening the lives of LGBT plus people, trans people in particular, actively making America a more dangerous place for them to live in. And so for New Line Theater to present a story that maliciously, aggressively pokes fun at those who enable this hypocrisy is something that we really need to see right now. So, have you seen the Rocky Horror Show at New Line Theater? If so, what did you think about it? And question of the day, what is your favorite song from the Rocky Horror Show? Or better yet, what is your favorite experience of Rocky Horror? Watching it on your own, going to see the live stage version, or even going to the theater to watch the movie, or watching a shadowcast of the movie. Whatever it is, whatever you think, comment below and let me know. If you want to catch more reviews from me, go to my website, jackreviewsmusicals.com, to read my back catalog of written reviews, and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any more reviews coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, long live the musical.